the idea of my career is I really want it to be meaningful. I want it to be useful. I can't really imagine working for something and just thinking, like I do my pizza, I clock off. It has to be mission driven. Like I have to feel like, I'm actually making a difference through what I do, because like your work is like the majority of your life, right? So you really want to think about, like how do I structure that in a way that I can look back when I'm older and think, like I did something useful.
It's cool because over the last, I guess, like 2.5, 3 years, I've started to become more active on some various online communities. And one of the guys that I had met was Alex Brogan.
Right.
He was part of the Next Chapter ecosystem. And there were probably like 3 or 4 different online kind of like learning communities that I found pretty interesting. Next Chapter was one of them. And so it's cool for me to be here in Korea, starting kind of my own community of sorts, and to see just the digital connections, because Alex was the one that connected us. Yeah, and see that manifest in real life. So thanks for joining the pod.
No, of course. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Just as a starting point, like professionally, in terms of your background, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I guess kind of rewinding. We can start from now. So I'm currently working as an analyst in a company called New Electro Partners. We're a corporate advisory firm between Australia and Korea, and we focus on climate-related transition projects. And I've been in the company for about a year now, but previous to that, I was kind of on, I guess you could say, like a bit of a professional sabbatical. So I was on the government scholarship called the New Colombo Plan Scholarship, and I did that for 19 months in between, and that was the reason why I left Australia originally. So I went to Singapore and then Korea, but before that I worked for 5 years in the Tasmanian government across the different sectors.
Wow. Okay. And tell me a little bit about even the new Colombo plan, because when we chatted, I think it was like a week ago, I don't think we touched on that as much, but I'm curious.
We didn't actually. So the new Colombo plan is a government run program under the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And it kind of, I guess the clear angle for the scholarship is to build like people-to-people connections for younger Australians within the Asia-Pacific region. And it was really driven from like the high-level strategy from the Australian government, because they really wanted to build like a long-term kind of connection program, making sure that Australians, like starting from younger ages, are really connected and like can speak the language. Like the languages are like a really big part. And actually they're currently undergoing some, I guess, like a reform and reviews of the program. So they're going to like when I was a scholar, so I was a 2022 scholar, but when I was a scholar, there was about 125 scholars a year under like the full scholar program. But they're going to ramp it up with the view to go to about 300 a year.
Wow.
So they're really building it out. And they're also focusing a lot more on language training. So I think they're going to allow students to focus like their whole program on language development. Whereas like at the moment, it's like up to 2 semesters overseas. You can do I think up to 6 months language training and up to 6 months internships. But it's kind of like a self-developed program. So you can choose like to increase or decrease certain parts of your program, and you self-select everything. You do your own visas, you do everything yourself. But as long as you fit kind of the guidelines, then you get financial support.
Interesting.
Under the scholarship. And it's run by like our Department of Foreign Affairs. So it's like very centralized under the government program.
That's really cool. And is that something, at least to your knowledge, that specifically like Tasmania does, or do all the other like regions or provinces within Australia, do they do something similar? Do you know? So
it's actually a national program. Okay. It's run, at the national level. But basically they kind of, so that it's through a couple of stages. So the first stage is you have to be nominated by your university. So they allow each university, I think at the time it was up to 10 like potential scholars per university they could nominate. I'm not sure if that's changed, but it was 10, and then you would then go through a formal process application with DFAT itself and then get interviewed. Usually they would send like the interviewees to Canberra to do interviews there with DFAT, but at my year, because it was in 2021, we just did it online because of COVID. But then so it's not technically by state, it's run like university and then national. But they do kind of, I think I guess, select scholars with the intention of creating a diversity of applicants across different states. So you're meant to have like hopefully a certain number from each state or like kind of regions of Australia.
That's pretty cool. So, I mean, you were doing that for, was it like a year and a half or
Just
on that
over?
scholarship?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I did the full 19. So you can do basically, well, it's however you might want up to 19.
Huh.
But I think the majority of scholars would be like 12 to 19 months.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because at least it's common for me being like mid to late 20s is a lot of people taking sabbaticals.
Right.
And the fact that there are government programs that, as long as there's some aligned kind of interests, that they would support people on those adventures is pretty awesome. And to hear that kind of, I guess, tied into your Korea experience to some extent is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So can you, I guess, give a little bit of background on how long you've been in Korea and the various like touch points that you've had over the course of your, I guess, last 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, of course. So I guess my kind of building a career in Korea was like majority unintentional. So like when I got the scholarship in like the end of 2021, my plan was to go so I was working in government, like I mentioned. So I wanted to kind of get into the private sector and get some experience there. And kind of build a career in a new area of impact. So I was really focused on like either wanting to get experience into sustainability and climate or into some kind of area of like education reform, education innovation. So those were like the two areas, but my background in government was like totally unrelated. So it was really like, how do I break into one of those areas and really explore that? And I kind of saw the NCP scholarship as a way to explore one of those areas through an internship while I was overseas. And at the time, because I had studied part-time and worked full-time, that allowed me to get the scholarship because like you have to be in university still. So I kind of saved all my lectures at the end. And then originally I was meant to go to China. So I was a China scholar. So you have to basically, like when you apply, you have like a primary location, and that's like you're a China scholar, you're a Vietnam scholar. So I was a China scholar with a secondary location in Singapore. And I really wanted to, go somewhere where it was like a focus on business and technology industries. So that's why I kind of chose those locations. But I guess like the other reason was around Mandarin learning, because I was kind of like learning Mandarin on the weekends in Australia. Ethnically, I'm half Chinese, but didn't learn it as a kid very well. So I really wanted to focus on learning Mandarin and being able to speak. And that's why I wanted to go into China. But I went to Singapore first for like 6 months, and then kind of like 2 months before that, after the second half of my program there, like I had to make a call. It's like, okay, do I go back to Australia, or do I go somewhere else? Because China wasn't opening for visas. So I kind of thought, well, like I quit my job to go overseas. I don't really want to go back to Australia and wait. So I decided, let's go somewhere else. And Korea was one of on the short list, but it didn't make the top at the time because of the language focus that I had. But then I was like, okay, well, let's give it a try. It's definitely, like, from what I can tell, it's got a business tech focus there in the industry. Again, like I didn't really know that much about Korea. Like I was like, okay, like I've watched a couple of dramas, I've seen a bit of that. Like I enjoy the music, not because I'm like a K-pop fan as such, but like I just enjoy the musicality because I do dancing as well. So I was like, okay, you can really dance to it. It's really cool. So I was like, it'd be an interesting place to explore. And one of my friends when I was in Singapore actually went to Korea on holiday, and then she came back. She's like, it totally fits your vibe. You should go. And I was like, all right, I trust you. So I kind of decided to go with it. Like I'd never been to Korea, but I was like, let's go there for at least 6 months. So my plan was to go there for like a little bit of language training and then a semester at Korea University.
And this was still under the NCP kind of umbrella, right? That whole stint. Yeah,
100%. Wow. So it would allow me to go there for like a semester there, a bit of language training, and that would give me like a stipend to live there while I do it. But at the time I was thinking, like maybe I'll come back to Singapore for the rest of my program if I can't get into China, and I can try and figure out how to learn Mandarin there. Although to be honest, like the Mandarin learning in Singapore, like it's a lot harder because it's all like the private schools, whereas in China you can learn at universities and it's so much cheaper and like more affordable. So I was kind of on the fence, I guess, but I still went to Korea. And then at the very first time I got there, like, so my parents actually went with me for like a week. So we went to Japan for a week and then we went to Korea for a week. And it was like kind of like a bunch of shocks. So, because I arrived in like start of December in 2022, and coming from Singapore, which is like stinking hot, and then going to Japan, I got to Japan, I was like, it's not that bad actually. And I thought Japan and Korea had like the same climate. So I was like, you know what, I can still kind of wear a t-shirt, it's fine.
When was this seasonality wise in terms of when you went to Japan?
It was like end of November.
Yeah. Okay, because I did 2 summers in Tokyo when I was in undergrad, and it was pretty brutal.
Yeah, really?
But I imagine, I mean, I've heard the summers here in Seoul are pretty rough as well.
Yeah, so I guess at the time it was like coming into winter, but it was like not, at least in Japan, it wasn't that bad. It was like Tokyo. And then we got to Korea and it was like way colder. And then we went to like, so in Tokyo, in Seoul for a couple of days, and then we went down to Busan, and it was so freezing. And like then like everything was kind of like a different transport system. It was, now it's really intuitive, but at the time, like coming from Japan to Korea, it felt like way less intuitive. And then like the whole like Google Maps not working thing. I remember when I went to Busan, like I'd organized to go to like this hotel, and also my parents had this great idea of like going to a different hotel every day. So like it gets you more experience, you know, you get to check out like loads of different places.
Wow.
Terrible idea. So basically we like booked this hotel, which looked like it was literally just down from Busan station. So you just had to go down, like walk up a little bit. But we got off the bus stop, and I'm like, okay, 1, there is no road. 2, it's like up this huge hill, like makes no sense. And then eventually we figured out like you could get up, but you had to go like on those like, I don't know, like, have you seen like Korean dramas, but like those really like steep random stairs that go up, like meander up into the hill. So we're doing that, and we have like luggage, right? So it was crazy. I definitely learnt my lesson about like get to the like the apps that you really need in Korea. But after that, like basically we were holidaying for like a week, and then my parents were back, and I mean it was a good experience. But then like I'd started like doing language training at Seogang University, which is over on like the northwest side of Seoul.
Okay. And
then I was like I'd booked like a share house in like more southeast side, and then like when I'd booked it, like I had no idea how big Seoul was or like the transport system. And I'd booked it for morning classes, and I'm not a morning person. So like I had to go on the like line 2 for about an hour every morning, like 7-8 o'clock in the morning during rush hour, which is hectic. And yeah, like that transition, and then like trying to learn Korean, where you go into a class and they're like, okay guys, like we know you don't know any Korean, here's like the alphabet, learn that in 3 days, and now read a paragraph. And I was like, yeah, no,
holy
like,
crap.
Sorry. So at first I wasn't, to be honest, like I kind of found the language learning pretty difficult, and I felt like I wasn't really getting anywhere.
And you had zero prior experience before getting into that.
Yeah.
And the students that were also part of this like Seogang University program, people from all different walks of life.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'd have, I mean, most of them were on the younger side, but we did have some like mature age adults in the class as well. It was like basically a mix. And I think it was about 15, 16 people in a class. So it was like a couple of tables. But you'd often find with like the very beginner class, like not everyone is actually beginner, because basically like if you fail the beginner one, like level 1, then you have to do it again. Or if, you know, you've learnt some, but you're not level 2, then you have to do level 1. So you'd actually get a mix of people who are like majority probably know at least a bit of Korean. So like that made it like extra kind of, I'd be in a class and I'm like, okay, like I am the absolute bottom right now. Like I'm suffering so much. But I kind of also, to be honest, I kind of shot myself in the foot a little bit, because I thought that I was only going to stay there originally for a couple of months. So I thought, you know, like I should get out, I should make friends, I should like go traveling in Korea rather than like focusing all my time in class.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing that. But then I found out probably like in the second half, like talking to some of like the other people in my class, that they'd been going to cafes and studying after class until like 10 p.m. So I was like, okay, so maybe that's also why I'm not keeping up. Like,
jeez.
Yeah.
Wow. And so your plan, or I guess like in the back of your mind, you thought you might stay in Korea for a couple months and then you might go back to either Australia or Singapore or just like somewhere else.
Exactly.
It was going to be a short-term plan.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when you're assessing whether or not learning the language is worth your time, that has a huge piece. Is like, how long are you going to be in the country for? Because even for myself, is like, this is a bit of a pilot period for me. Yeah. And if I decide to stay in Korea through 2025, then obviously the payoff of learning the language is a lot higher. Right? Whereas if I'm leaving in a couple months, it's like there's no use.
Exactly.
No point in it. Yeah,
that was kind of my angle at the time. Mm-hmm. But it was only until, so basically I did that, I think, so like the universities, I was in like Seogang University, so they have like university, like they taught the universities, but they're Korean language courses specifically, so it's not part of the usual university programs. But like majority, I think almost all of the universities in Korea actually have these language programs, so it's pretty standardized. And the curriculum is basically the same as well, but I did that for 10 weeks. So they do 10 weeks apiece. And then I went straight into like exchange semester at Korea University.
And how many of those 10-week programs, so there's like different levels, right?
Yeah.
If you first pass the first 10 weeks and you go to the next one, how many levels were there? Do you remember?
6 levels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it's matched to like the what's it called? HSK? Is that right?
Topic. Yeah. I've seen that around.
I'm messing up with like the Chinese one. But basically, there's like 6 levels and it's matched to the standard like certification. Okay. So then if you pass each level, it basically says, oh, you're at this level.
I see.
But they're really brutal with the exams because you have to get, I think, off memory, I think it's 80% to pass in the examinations, and they do like written, speaking, all across everything. And like for me, listening, I was terrible at listening at the time. But then I was also really kind of shy about speaking. And then writing, they'd mark you off on like it's like, you know, like if you're doing like, you know, handwriting or whatever, like if you make a slight curve wrong or like you make it stylized, they're like, no, that's wrong.
Yeah, it's very by the books.
Yeah. So like I remember one time, like I'd written like, I always think of it as the S because like they actually have names in Korean, but like we never actually learned that. But like when you speak to a Korean, they're like, oh, this is like this letter and this is that letter. But basically the one in my mind that I always think is an S because the sound is an S. It kind of like in some textbooks, it looks like it's basically just, I guess, like a peak. So then I drew it like that when I first went to class. I'm like, this is how it is. And they're like, no, the second strike starts in the middle. Like you're doing it wrong. So we're going to like give you 0 points. And I was like, wait, what? No one taught you that. Like, this is crazy. Jeez. But yeah, like, so you learn like kind of really tough love in those schools. And it's quite, it does work in the sense, like if you're really dedicated to it, you can really learn fast. And like some of my friends at the time that I was really close with, when I was in the semester, like we kind of came to Korea around the same time and she was already like level 3 at that stage and could like basically have, I guess, the kind of more standard day-to-day conversations with people, and she would understand a lot of what they're saying. And like here I am 2 years later and like I'm only kind of reaching that at this point. So like if you're really focused on it, but also I guess a decent person in terms of like learning languages, then you can really go really fast.
So that was around 2 years ago now is when you were in that program?
Yeah. Okay. Well, just under. So I came to Korea in like the start of December in 2022. So almost 2 years. Yeah. Gotcha.
Okay. This is interesting to me because the last time we chatted, we didn't explore this part of the dynamic. So after you take the 10-week long course, like what level of proficiency would you say? Like, could you have held a conversation, like a basic conversation with somebody?
Very topic based. So, you could, say like, where is something, or like I want this, or like order, you know, from the cafe. You can have like basic conversations, but like very focused on like survival language. Like you won't know how to say, you know, like understand directions that well. That's like level 2. And like, some of like the more kind of slightly more complicated grammar structures, you won't have a clue about.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, this is, I guess just high level context is it's cool for me to have you on the podcast because like with Cambridge and what I hope to do is some people have asked me, like, is this a Korean exclusive type of thing, right? And I was always of the opinion of, like, there's going to be a set of values for this community, and it's going to be very, like, opt-in dynamic, where if you share these set of values and you have interest or passion about Korea, then you can be a part of it. And it's funny because there have been people that I've met here in Seoul that have lived in Korea longer than me, can speak much more of the language. And even though like ethnically they are not Korean, on many dimensions, they are like more Korean than I am. So you're probably the first example of somebody like this. So it's cool to have you on. And I guess the path in terms of you being in Korea, from what you've explained so far, very like serendipitous and kind of opportunistic in terms of how you got here. But I guess continue with where you left off, which is like, so you went through the Sogang University program, and then you did, you were just in an exchange program at Korea University after that?
Yeah, so I went to Goryeo for like the standard, like, what was it, 5 months, like exchange. And like I had met like a lot of my close friends because I was living in a co-living building kind of about 30 minutes walk from the university. So I wasn't living on campus, and I think that made a big difference in terms of like getting super into the uni life. So I'd say I was kind of like, like a few steps away from that. Like I did engage a little bit, especially they had like this buddy program as well. So you get to meet like other foreigners and like Korean students as well who are kind of opt in to like kind of a cultural exchange and helping foreigners. But it was like, I mean, it's Goryeo there, so there's like a lot of drinking. That's like the main thing with like the buddy program. So most of my experiences with the kind of university life itself was like going, you know, like in like the uni like section around the university and like doing soju, like playing drinking games and stuff, and just hanging out with people. It was fun, but like probably most of my closest friends were all from my building. So I like had this really close group of girls and some guys in my building as well. And we would like study in this cafe that was like at the bottom floor all the time. And then we just hang out. And like, I think in a sense, like my friendship with them inspired me to stay longer because like they were all really, you know, also enjoyed being in Korea. And like, I guess like the shared friendship and shared excitement of like being there together helped us like really love it more. So like at probably about 3 months in, I was thinking more about, you know, how can I stay longer? Because like they were also wanting to stay. And they also like had a really keen interest of like doing like, you know, like potentially working in Korea or like spending more time in Korea at some point. And yeah, like we kind of, you know, we're like helping each other learn Korean and like talking about, you know, what ways we can find work or internships and stuff. So that kind of really inspired me to think about, you know, what are the kind of networks that I need? How can I find potentially work here? Understanding the logistics of like visa situation here as well, because it's quite complicated for foreigners. It's probably, I'd say, like the huge, like one of the biggest hurdles. Like language is the first hurdle. And then even if you can speak the language, or even if you find work that, you know, doesn't require you to be fluent, you're still going to have to go through like the visa hurdle. So getting through those two, because I've had a lot of friends who have even been like, you know, I found like this potential contact and I like found this internship, but like we realized there's no visa that we can work off, or like they're not willing to like sponsor. So then it all fell apart. Wow. So it's quite, a complicated situation in Korea. And I think a lot of the firms, you know, if they don't know the situations well, they're not really willing to like go through the whole process of trying to figure it out and understand it.
Yeah, I'm going through the F4 visa application process. And I mean, for me, it's like advantageous just because of like my heritage and all that stuff. And the fact that they have like something like the F4 visa is pretty amazing. But even my parents, they went to the like Chicago consulate of Korea to try and file all that paperwork. and they were like very stringent about like what
Really?
counts and what doesn't. And my mom has to get like a bunch of paperwork from the US government to prove her citizenship. And so when it comes to, I mean, it's funny because you see it in multiple parts of the culture where something as small as you trying to write out that S symbol, you know, and them being very strict about it.
Right.
And you can see it in the workplace as well, in terms of like very rule-based kind of strict society.
Yes, that is true.
There's advantages to it for sure, but also disadvantages.
Yeah. There's also kind of like, I'd say like not one clear answer in the way it's presented. So there is like a helpline and stuff, but it's kind of, you know, I've called them up and got different answers before. And then also when you go in person, it's kind of based on who your assessment officer is and what they think. It's like their word is kind of like the rule of law, like when you come there. And like majority of them also don't speak English, which is like such a weird dynamic. But like when you go to the immigration centers, and like I've talked to this like with all the like my foreigner friends, we all kind of just like, especially if you're not fluent. I think maybe if you're fluent, it's a bit easier. But if you aren't fluent in Korean, every time you go, you just like have to like breathe in and out before you go in, and you're like kind of shore up your energy. You're like, okay, you know, we can do this. It's fine. Like, because then you're just walking into like this kind of like warfare for like a few hours and like have to go through everything. And it's quite an interesting experience, but it's like also like I remember one of my kind of like a scholar that came in a few years after me. They're currently here. They've had kind of weird situations as well, like their application, if they're going for an exchange at university, like I would think one thing, and like my experience like was fine getting like the visa and stuff, but they've had situations where, you know, they have like an exchange relationship with their university in the university that they're applying to in Korea. And then the immigration officer was like, no, like this like exchange like relationship was super old, and they asked for like proof of the exchange, like actual partnership. And then they'd actually like they had to like my friend had to contact their university and ask for like the official documentation and like actually send that to them, and they were nitpicking it and like basically almost cancelled his visa. And that went through like I think like a month. And it's so weird because like for me, my experience was like they never asked for anything. Like they were just like, okay, you know, like I applied in country, so I got to Korea on like the tourist visa, like for the first 3 months. And then because I was applying for the university, but like I didn't have the official approval yet, so I couldn't apply before I got here. And then I went to the immigration center and like kind of hoped that I could change my visa, because like when I contacted the university, I asked them, I was like, do you know if I can apply in the country? And their response was like, we believe so. Basically. They're like, I think so. I mean, that sounds like the best course, but like we can't guarantee anything. So do what you want. Like basically just good luck.
When you contact the authority figures and they're not exactly sure what the rules are, that's you know you're in for a fun ride. So when you were in the exchange program, were you just on a tourist visa, or there was a specific visa that you had to be part of that exchange program? So
exchange, you're under like the D2. So I switched to the D2 for the exchange component. And it's like usually like I think they give it to you for like 1 or 2 semesters basically, and then you can renew, and it's like linked to your ARC, like the alien registration card. So I actually got that, but I went through kind of a weird process as well, because I remember applying for my visa. They were like, yeah, that's fine, come back in 4 weeks for your documentation. I came back and they literally just handed me my card, like, here's your card, enjoy. And like, because I'd never been through the process, I was like, okay, I guess that's it. So I took it away, and I had the ARC, so I was fine. And then about like a month later, I was talking to my friends, and they're like, oh, you know, like, what's your visa number and stuff? Like, don't you have like visa documentation? And I was like, well, I have like the ARC card, it says that I have the D2, but I don't know the details of it. Like, they're like, oh, but you should have like a visa number, and like you should know like when the visa expires and all this kind of stuff. No idea. And then I went back to the immigration center, and like I called them up, and like I was explaining to them, I was like, is there a difference between like the ARC expiry date and like the visa expiry? And some people would say, oh yeah, there is a difference. And then I was on the phone with this one guy, and I said, okay, well, I know my ARC number, but like I don't know when my visa expires. And we went in circles for like half an hour and he kept being like, oh, well, like, what is it? I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, I'm asking you. Like, and at the end, like, literally, like, I think he hung up on me. Like, that was it. So I was like, okay, well. And then basically I was kind of panicked for like a few months there, being like, you know, like, I had this date, but like, I hope it's right. Like, what if I have to leave the country earlier? Because like some of my friends had like the ARC number, like the ARC date, but they were told that they had to leave the country earlier than that because of like the visa expiry.
And the program that you were a part of, it was like just for a few months? Yeah,
just like a standard exchange at the time. But then like I think eventually I had a call with this one lady on the phone, and her advice was that like apparently like the universities are meant to say, you know, if you're not doing a second semester, they will notify the immigration, and then the immigration will send a letter and say, you know, like you need to leave by this date. So I was like, okay, well, I will wait for the letter, which never came, by the way. So I literally I just stayed until like my ARC expiry date, which worked out. So whatever. Like, yeah, but they definitely make it like not super clear sometimes. Yeah.
So eventually you get the visa situation figured out, right? And I guess in the process, knowing that you hope to stay, and the reason why you were wanting to stay was because you did find like a community of solid friends, and all of them were interested in sticking around as well, right?
Exactly, yeah. So I guess, well, in a way, so like my close group of friends, they really inspired me to stay, but actually like most of them left. So one of them, so Alicia's back in Canada, so she's from Canada.
Okay.
And the other two are from Europe. So, well, they're back now, but actually one of them she left and then came back for like an internship as well. And like, I think, you know, we keep in contact, and then some of them come on holiday. And like, I guess like the end goal is like some of them do definitely want to come back to Korea for work, but it's just a process.
And were those folks, I guess if you were to categorize them, were they all like foreigners, or were a handful of them like people of Korean diaspora just like interested in exploring their Korean heritage?
Yeah. Those groups are like fully foreigners. Yeah. So I'd say I do have a couple of like more diaspora friends. But a lot of them were probably, I'd say a lot of them were like born in Korea, they lived overseas and then came back.
I see.
So more like in Korea, they'd still be like gyopo, kind of like, yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay. And the origins of most of those, the people in the exchange program that you were close with, their interest in Korea, did it have to do with like the K-wave and things like that? Or was it just more serendipitous than that?
More serendipitous, I think. Not necessarily the K-wave itself, more like, I mean, some of them are like really interested in languages, just like being able to practice and like learn new languages.
I see.
And then others, I mean, they were like interested in, like they do have, you know, like they did enjoy K-dramas and stuff like that, but it was more like kind of finding an interest in a country and then latching onto that as like a way to get overseas and like get experience overseas.
Gotcha.
So like that was like a really big inspiration for them. Like for example, my friend in Canada, she really wanted to like go overseas, and like Korea was like one of the first places she was interested from a younger age. So she was like, okay, well, like it makes sense to go there. And then she really enjoyed being in Korea. So
okay, that makes sense. And then I do want to get to, I mean, at the very beginning, you mentioned that you are like an analyst for New Electric Partners, right?
Yep.
And even the industry that you're in, I haven't interacted with that many people in Korea in that space. When you were going through the like job search process, curious like where how your mindset was, because at least for me, and it was a completely different context, but I had thought that I wanted to be some sort of investment professional.
Right.
And there's like a very set playbook of like what you need to do to get there. And so it was very predictable for me in terms of what moves to make. But for you were in a completely new country, working out the visa situation. Like tell me a little bit about how your thought process was when you were looking at new jobs.
Yeah. There was definitely not like clear steps. It was more just like, okay, thinking about, you know, what ways could there be to access the job market, because as a foreigner, it's actually really, really difficult to like understand, you know, where you could get jobs, especially at like the more junior level. Like if you are like kind of like earlier, like recent graduate, like, I mean, I did graduate pretty recently, like even though I'd worked in Australia, because it was like pre-graduation, I was like working and studying. I'd say like in Australia, that's pretty common. And like you can work, you know, you can even climb like pretty senior, like while being that early. But in Asia, there's like this conception that, you know, the day you graduate is like really like that's when your career starts, right? Because most people, they don't work while they're studying. And it's really, really prevalent, actually. I remember talking to someone because I was looking at potentials for like MBA as well, about, you know, like, you know, will that help me kind of get into a career that I'm really interested in? Because I kind of felt like, yes, I had experience in Australia, but one, it was government, which is like very different from working private. And two, it's like, okay, in Asia, like they have a completely different perception of like my work experience. So like, do I need to do other training, or like, will that help me also just kind of break into a completely different industry or different like kind of specific area that I'm interested in? So I remember talking to a couple of people and networking, and I like talked to some people from, which university was it? One of the, I think Peking or Tsinghua, because they came on like, I think they were coming for like some kind of education event, but I ended up connecting to them and had a quick chat with them. And their advice was basically like, okay, so the way their university assesses students is you have to have, I think, 2 or 3 years between your date of graduation and the date of starting an MBA. And they don't give it, like, they don't care what you do in between. Like, you could have been doing nothing. You don't need to be working. You don't need work experience. It's literally just those dates. Like, if you don't have 3 years in between or 2 years in between, but you've worked way more, they don't care.
That's wild.
So, like, she was like, I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. Like, she was, like, really frank with me.
Yeah.
So that kind of, like, it kind of flavors, like, kind of the attitudes in East Asia as well, more generally.
Yep.
Because like everyone mostly just studies, you do that, and then it's very blocks. Like you do your study, then you do your work, and you climb up the rank. So like I was thinking, you know, like what ways can I get into the job market if I want to? So then for me, it was kind of, I guess, instinctual to think, okay, let's go network with some Australians. Like, let's go chat to some people.
And were you involved with the, I guess, like Australian community in Korea up until that point when you started thinking about jobs, or not really?
Not that much.
Okay.
Like I knew about basically like there's a Chamber of Commerce called the Australian Chamber of Commerce, and that's like the main kind of like business networking location for Australians here. And each country, a lot of countries have their own chambers here. But I mean, I'd met some of like the team for coffee, so I'd had a chat with them. And they'd basically said, you know, like, feel free to come to events. But I guess like the most relevant ones would be they do monthly networking events, but they'd only kind of started that more recently. So at the time, like before I actually started networking, there wasn't that much opportunities. So one, like there was kind of like less opportunity, but also I was like really kind of preoccupied with like doing like more just chilling and like enjoying being, you know, not working for a while. Because like literally like since I was 18 until like, when did I leave Australia? 2022. So like those 5 year period, like I was never like a uni student. I was always working full time and studying part time and then doing all these other extracurricular. So like I never really had the time to just like breathe as a uni student and like chill and like, you know, actually go do like, you know, society events and like do dancing competitions and all this kind of like, I did a bit of dancing back in Australia, but it was like, you know, you'd have to kind of eke out the time. Like everything had to be diaried, everything had to be tracked and make sure you actually have the time to do things. So it was very intentional, but like being overseas, I was like, okay, no, I really want to kind of like, in a sense, like make my life purposely unstructured and make myself kind of, you know, like not plan everything out, because I was a big planner. And like it is a strength, but at the same time, I felt like it was also a weakness. So I really wanted to break that down and really just kind of go with the flow and like try new things and like kind of basically, you know, like leave my calendar fully open and just do whatever like turned up basically, and just like do things with friends, or like, you know, if someone wants to go do something, you talk to someone and you kind of flows through. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I don't know if I had mentioned this the last time we spoke, but a few episodes back on my podcast, The Idea Exchange, I had interviewed this guy, Matt Joss, and he is actually originally from Auckland, I believe.
Ooh, okay.
And then he moved to Sydney, but he is like an investment officer at a fund that he started called Maven Funds, and it's based out of Sydney. And he primarily invests in Australian stocks, but he had written a Substack, and it was titled The Problem with Problem Solving. And I interviewed him about the Substack post that he had written, but kind of one thing that he had articulated in that post was that like humans in general, we have like two sides of the brain, a more analytical side and one that's a little bit more spontaneous, creative, and open-ended. And he was saying in terms of like modern society and where we have gone, a lot of it is very analytical focused of defining the problem and hitting things in very structured steps. And that has gotten us very far, especially in like the scientific domain.
Right.
But we have kind of lost touch with the more creative kind of serendipitous dynamic. And it resonated with me because as somebody who, especially since they were young, was very like industrious, conscientious, always planning it out, executing the steps in like the correct order of operations. I much more was comfortable in that setting. But I could see like issues with not allowing a little bit more kind of open-ended learning and how powerful that can be. So it sounds like you've kind of hit a similar journey as well. And it's cool, especially like doing some traveling, experiencing a new environment, is I feel like I come across a lot more people kind of in the same vein as you as well.
I think it's quite an interesting topic in terms of like that whole like more analytical versus like curiosity or like being a lot more kind of spontaneous, inquisitive nature. Like I think like for me, I mean, yes, like I was like way more on like the structured side, and that's like why I've purposely tried to rebalance that. But I think I had like the benefit of kind of having gone through like that kind of self-reflection before. So like, I can't remember if we talked about it, but like I was homeschooled for 10 years, right? So yeah, we did. I was homeschooled for 10 years, and like a part of that process was like, I think like me, it was kind of also like, I ended up being more on like a lot more analytical structured side because like that was where my strengths lied for the most part. And like I kind of steered myself that way, like intuitively. But at the same time, like when I started homeschooling, like I started when I was like 6, 7. And for like the first 2 years, my mom was like super into Steiner education as a model. So, and like a lot about Steiner is like helping kids like kind of rediscover or like keep connected to that curiosity. So like we went from like, you know, like doing classrooms and all that kind of stuff and then I went into homeschooling, and it was very much like, you know, do knitting, like throw balls at each other, go out into the garden and like do something for 5 hours, like figure it out. Like, and it was so much like way more unstructured and like just being like a kid again. Like it was so interesting like that, you know, like I probably don't have as much memories of my childhood as like I should. I don't know. I feel like I have like really bad memory, but that's what I really remember. Just like the feeling of like kind of just, I don't know, like letting go in a sense and just being allowed to like explore yourself as a person. And like that feeling kind of, I feel like it kind of resonated in the sense that I always kind of like to kind of rebalance. Like I always think, okay, you know, where am I at like as a person in terms of like, you know, like my social connections, like the way I like plan things out, the way I interact, the way I make decisions. And like if I want to make changes, like I can do that and like kind of think, you know, how do I readjust this based on like what I want to achieve? And like going through that process is really, that's, I guess you could say like why I'm pretty interested in like the education side of things as well. Because I think like people often do, you know, like there's so much more than like the cookie cutter, like one size fits all kind of process. And so many people have like the opportunity to try new things and kind of like shift themselves. So it's a really interesting space to like explore.
When we first chatted, I was interested in speaking with you for two reasons. One was because I had seen that you started the whole Korean Australia Young Professionals organization, which I do want to ask you more about. And the second was you were operating in a space professionally that I'm very unfamiliar with, which is like climate and tech and all of that stuff. But when we chatted, the thing that most piqued my curiosity was your background is like very unique. And since you had mentioned it, just in terms of the homeschooling and educational experience. So you said it was 10 years you were homeschooled for. And when was the first, at what age did you actually go to formal education? Because that must have been a pretty jarring experience to go from 10 years of homeschooling into a more structured environment.
Yeah, so I was homeschooled from about like 6 until 16. So then I went back for like year 11 and year 12, because in Australia, like it depends on which state, but like in Tasmania, for example, where I grew up, like you have to do year 11 and year 12 in order to get like your university entrance score.
Okay.
So like if you don't do that, you can still get to university, but it's quite hard because like, I mean, you can get into the university, but some universities might decide, you know, you can't do this course, you can't do this because we don't know where to place you. Like we don't know what score you have. So like for me, I was like, okay, well, maybe it's just better to go the standard route. So like you can easily kind of get entrance into something that you want. So I chose to like go back to year 11, year 12, which in Tasmania is actually called college because they have a separate school system. So like high school is usually like year 7 to year 10, and then college is like 11 and 12. So it's not university. It's just like the last 2 years of senior high school.
Interesting. That is weird.
Yeah. But basically it's because they have a very different system. So in those 2 years, like everything you study can go, you have the option of it going towards your score. So like you can pick like 4 to 5 subjects each year, and then you get examined on that. And like your top, usually like 4 to 5 that are at the right level of pre-tertiary go straight into your examination score.
So high school ends in grade 10?
Yes.
And
yes.
it starts in grade, what, 6 or 7?
7.
7?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That is very unusual.
Yeah, it was an interesting process. Like I also, like I was doing slightly above my grade level as well because like me and my brother like both homeschooled together. So like we ended up studying the same thing. So I'd study kind of like his level. So we'd do like everything like, well, we would basically get a textbook and we'd go through it together, and then we'd go on to the next textbook or whatever.
And to what extent were your parents like directing you guys or putting you into some sort of curriculum or deciding which textbooks you guys would read?
At first it was a lot more directed. I mean, I was like super young. So like the Steiner was like for, I think it was like 1 or 2 years. And then after that, it started being more about kind of just, here's a textbook, have fun. But it was like, originally actually, we did a lot of like American curriculum, which was kind of a weird dynamic. So I remember learning about like, I forgot most of it, but I remember learning about like American history and like the like Indian Americans and stuff like that, and like that process instead of like the Aboriginal history in Australia, which is really weird. But like we did like a lot of American history and like American curriculum, and then I think that was probably about halfway through, and then the next 5-6 years we kind of just based on like different textbooks. It would be kind of random. It'd be like, okay, well, if you've learnt this, then maybe this is the next step up. Just read this, like just enjoy it. Like, and we did also blocks. So like I think that was like one of the things that probably I had to adjust the most to in college was like having to study, 5 different subjects at once, because we studied like per subject at a time. So like basically I'd be fully into being a math nerd for like a few months, and then I would go into like chemistry, or then I'd go into something else. So like it was more just like the structure of that was really jarring. And also just like, I guess like because my curriculum didn't match everything, it was kind of like some subjects I'd be way more advanced in, and other things like I wouldn't know what I was doing. So it was like matching that and trying to like fill the gaps in after going into college was quite an interesting like experience.
Because especially now, at least in the Twitter sphere, or people that are passionate about education, it's like at least in the US, for the most part, the standardization of it is like you learn X, Y, and Z at these specific grade levels, and then you can move on. But it's like if you have a specific aptitude or curiosity about a specific subject, you don't really have that much leeway to explore those things. And so there have been people that have been like, hey, I think the right a framework for education is completely like open-ended. And I try and think back of like, for myself, when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years of age, would that structure have worked for me? Because I feel like if I was given complete leeway, it would have gone off the rails. Like I would have just found video games and just been like, like wasting my time. But in terms of your own educational viewpoints do you think that was a pretty effective framework in terms of your own development? And if you were to have kids in the future, or even if you were to like recommend to other people who are looking for more of an open-ended system in terms of how to structure it, or lack thereof in terms of structure? I'm just curious in terms of your own perspective, how you feel about that.
I think there are definitely pros and cons to it overall. But like for me, like one of the better advantages of it was just like that level of individualism and that level of kind of like independence. So for me, like it was very much, you know, like if you want to like learn something, you have to do it. Like no one's going to tell you to like get up every morning. Like no one's going to do anything. So it was very much like just, kind of deciding within yourself, like you want to learn something, you want to do this, and you want to like have a routine that works for you. So for me as well, like it was very kind of self-decided. Like I would wake up when I wanted to, I would study when I wanted to. We didn't have set start and stop times. We didn't have holidays as such either. So like we would study all year round, but it would be like, you know, if you want to not study for a day, you can do that, like whatever, like do what you want. So it was also very like unstructured from like the regulation side. So I think these days the government's a lot more strict, but at the time, like they would send someone like every year just to check that you've learned something and just be like, okay, show me what you've been doing. Like give me an expose for like, you know, like what you've been doing for the last 12 months. So it was like very, like they weren't very strict about it. And I think it was just like the nature of like not many people homeschooled. So it was kind of like a rare case.
So did you know other people within your own community that were doing something similar? Because this seems pretty wild. And I could imagine like, oh, it's everybody in this specific neighborhood or this region is doing it. So it's more of a cultural thing. Yeah. But yours is a pretty idiosyncratic example.
Yeah, there was like literally very little people. We did meet a couple of homeschooling families, but they were quite specific. So like most of them tended to be on the religious side and they like were in like a community. So we did meet a couple, but it didn't really fit our profile because like we weren't there for like any religious kind of reason. My mum just decided that it was a good idea at the time and then stuck with it. So like we mostly just did it ourselves. Like we weren't in like a set community of like homeschooling families or anything.
Was there ever, from like a social dynamic perspective, some interest in doing like regular school type stuff? Because I feel like I was homeschooled for maybe like 3 or 4 years, something like that. And I had 2 older siblings. For the homeschooling for me was actually quite comfortable, being like a hyper introvert and enjoying reading and all of that stuff. But for my older siblings, like they were very social, and I think they missed that aspect or dimension of the development process. And when they went back to school, it was like really refreshing for them because they were in an environment that they felt a lot more comfortable in. Did you and your brother ever think to yourself like, hey, we want to be in an ecosystem with a bunch of other students and making friends, or did you have other outlets for that?
So we did have a little bit of an outlet. So we do kind of like different like extracurriculars. So I think like when I was like 8, I did like different dance classes like tap, jazz, song and dance. And then we did like swimming classes as well. And then we went back to dance, or I did a bit of drama. But like I would say like it's still not the same thing as like being in school, right? It's a bit different. And I guess like I probably would have missed it more if I could recollect that much. But because I started when I was like 6, like for me, like honestly, like I don't think I really missed it because like I didn't really remember what I was missing that much. But I think as an adult, I can see back and think, okay, there are definitely kind of missed opportunities in terms of like, you know, how you can develop through the school. I mean, not all of them are good all the time. Like, you know, like there's like some of my friends when I talk to them and they're like, oh, you know, like kind of the bitchiness or like, you know, like growing up phase and all that kind of stuff. Like I didn't have that. It was like very calm, like high school experience. But like I think, like there's still benefits to that for sure. So there's definitely like some areas of like just kind of learning the social norms and like having like a shared like youth experience as well. And then there's also like the little things. Like I remember like after school, like when I started working, I'd talk to some people and like, you know, whenever people like kind of like friends or coworkers would talk about like, I don't know, like a popular like kids show, like, you know, like a lot of kind of like pop culture. I had no idea what I was talking about.
Out of the loop.
I was like, they're like, you sure you're Australian? Like, what is going on? Like, why don't you know XYZ? Because like literally like everything that I consumed was like, you know, like whatever I was reading or like things on the web or whatever, but like a lot of the stuff that was, you know, you'd learn through just like talking to other kids, like I never got that. So it just makes life like a lot more kind of unique, I think. There's not necessarily like overall good or bad, but it's just a bit different.
Yeah, the thing that I'm very interested in as it relates to education as well is, you know, we were even talking about grad school, and you had mentioned like considering MBA programs and all of that. And even for myself, I've wondered like, would that be helpful or advantageous in some way? And I think the hardest part about it is I love to learn, but my learning is so independent now, right, where if I'm not interested in that topic, like it's just hell for me. You know, it's like I don't want to be reading a book or like memorizing equations or formulas that I have no interest in. And the fact, especially with the internet, whether it's like these podcast conversations are very much a learning endeavor for me, or it's like I can download a book on Kindle, read half of it, and if I don't like the rest of it, just, you know, move on to something else, is so like freeing and awesome that I'm just not sure if I can put myself back into a structured environment. Yeah. But that's it's part of my fascination. I do want to get back to the two pieces of interest as well. In terms of the whole job situation and I guess starting at New Electric, and you said you have been there for, it's about a year now?
Yeah, so just about, it was like a year, what is it now? October, right? So like year and 3 months-ish?
You had said, I think in our previous conversation, of like you had some deep interest in chemistry, right? When you were younger.
Yeah.
In terms of like climate tech and that whole space, is that an area that you had any thoughts of going down?
It wasn't specifically, like I just remember thinking, you know, like I really interested in like sustainability and like getting to work in that space, because like for me, I think the idea of my career is like I really want it to be like meaningful. I want it to be useful. Like, I mean, obviously, like for me in terms of like value sets, like you want to earn enough like that you think is like, you know, like you're getting rewarded for what you put in. But at the same time, like I can't really imagine working for something and just thinking, you know, like I do my pizza, I clock off, like that's it, like it's just a function. For me, it's like very much like it has to be mission driven. Like I have to feel like, you know, I'm actually making a difference through what I do, because like your work is like the majority of your life, right? Like, right. So you really want to think about, you know, like how do I structure that in a way that I can look back when I'm older and think, you know, like I did something useful. And a big part of that is also just like the company itself, like thinking about, you know, what is the mission? Who are the people? Do they really like reflect that in the way they work and like what they do? And like finding that alignment. So for me, it was like looking for that kind of match when I was job searching, which is kind of interesting because like, especially when you're in like another country and also like, you know, you're looking at a different industry, like some people would be like, you can't afford to be picky. Like, what are you doing? Like, you should just look for anything and just jump at it, right? Yep. Which I definitely got some of that advice. People would be like, you know, just do, you know, if you find something that could work, just do it. Like, so I was kind of straddling my ideal set. So it's like, you know, what do I do next? Like, how do I approach this? But I guess I kind of hit a lucky break in the sense that like the job that I currently do now, it was like the perfect matchup of like being in Korea, but like working for an Australian company. So I have that aspect of like, one, like not having to like speak Korean like fluently as my job role, but also just like having that also like just cultural match down to like having coworkers from like the same country. Like I don't really feel like I miss Australia because like I'm still surrounded by Australians in that sense. So you feel really comfortable at work as well, but at the same time you do get that experience of being overseas and like, you know, working with different like investors or counterparties in Korea, and like the aspect of like, I guess having the flexibility. So like our team is like there's like 5 or 6 of us who are really agile. We work kind of like as like consultants. So like we all kind of do our own thing really independently, but then we also like match up and like see each other meetings. We can like go like work together for a day. But there's like this huge amount of like inherent like independence and like autonomy to like the work we do, which for me is like a perfect match because like, you know, the way I grew up makes me like really love like that independence of like kind of like working style and like living style. So that was like a really great match in that sense. And something that I feel like people when they're in like early or mid career is like a bit harder to find, because it's usually when you're like at senior levels, like you can do like a consulting gig or like do your own like thing and like just run that off.
Yep.
So like getting that opportunity to do it now has been kind of like a really cool experience. Like going from government, for example, to this is like a huge gap in terms of like work culture. So like that's been so interesting as well. But then again, like the mission and like what we actually do, focusing on like climate transition projects has been like a huge, I mean, one, it's like it does align, but it's also kind of opened my eyes, because like when I said that I wanted to like work in sustainability, like sustainability is huge, right? There's so many different avenues of sustainability. Like, what do you mean by that? So like me working, like what we do is usually like focusing on kind of a lot of like infrastructure or technology projects, and getting them to commercial production, and like looking for like the right investors or offtake partners. So like in a sense, it's like, because we work on individual project levels, like I've got so much more knowledge now about like the actual ins and outs of like different technologies or industries, like that, I'd read an article and I think, oh, that's pretty cool. But like actually getting to like work on it in depth is like such a different experience of actually understanding what that means at like, I guess, a local or like lower level, but also at the macro level, because you have to think in our jobs as well at like country policies and international geopolitics, like the way higher like macro scale of like where this fits in the energy transition. So it's like, yeah, you get like that huge bird's eye view as well as like getting to work on like a single project and like work with single people, and like, yeah, it's such a cool kind of experience and job.
Yeah, when we were chatting last time, you were explaining some of the like research that you were doing and learnings, and I have to admit, like most of that was going over my head because it was way too complex for me. But it sounds like it's an incredible like learning environment to be in. So in terms of the company itself, so they're an Australian company with I guess physical presence both in Australia and Korea, right?
Yeah.
And are the companies that they're either consulting or collaborating with, they're primarily like Korean companies and Australian companies? Is there presence in other parts of Asia as well?
Yeah, so I think, so like the way we started out was mostly focusing on an Australia-Korea relationship, in the sense that most of our clients originally were Australian companies, although they might have assets or like their projects might be overseas, but they'd be Australian, like either private or ASX listed. And then on the other side, like majority, I guess, of the initial like investors and counterparties were Korean, because like the partner, like my boss who works in Korea, he's lived here for like 20 years. So like he's got like huge networks in terms of the Korean set of like investors. So like that was like a big part of like how we operate. But then I guess these days we also like, we're always kind of branching out into like, a new area of field that is kind of complementary to what we do, or like finding new investors or like new like partners just through networking and like going to different conferences. So we do have like, I guess, some connections like in America, not as much in Europe, but every now and then, and like also Japan as well.
And tell me a little bit about the Korean Australian Young Professionals organization that you decided to start, because one of the things that I'm excited about that we did chat a little bit about beforehand was just in terms of Cambridge and what the interesting opportunities might be, is like this is a very much a global ecosystem, and people are going to have to self-select into specific groups or niches within that broader community. And I think this is a good example where it's like, now that you and I have met and I know that you have kind of this organization, any like Korean, Australian that I come across, I'm definitely going to point them to you. So can you tell me a little bit about like why you started it and what it is? Because it's very new, right?
Yeah, super new. So we actually launched at like the end of September officially. There was like a pre-launch event before that, which was actually more of just like getting to meet people and thinking about, like, is there a potential for us to launch something in Korea? So that kind of process started in like, I guess, July-ish. But really, like, I guess the key concept around this was like when I first came to Korea as like an Australian young professional, I was thinking, like I'd potentially, especially like a few months in, I was like, I really want to consider working in Korea and like finding the right networks. But it's not the most obvious in terms of like who you should talk to and like, what opportunities are out there, or just like meeting like-minded people who you can like bounce off and just kind of, have like a bit of like an advisory board kind of feeling like, so I think like in that sense, like I felt like there was something missing in Korea, like a community or like kind of space that you can meet people at. And thinking about that, because of the scholarship that I'm part of, like as an alumnus, we have to think about, like how can we support future cohorts as well.
Yep.
So it's very like there's a big focus on the program about like how you mentor people and like how you support them as well. And for me, like especially the fact that I'm still overseas, like I haven't gone back to Australia, so like I kind of get the opportunity to be exposed to like each new generation as they come each year, right? So then I felt like it was kind of like a duty of care as well about, you know, how do I make sure like they get the most of their program, and how do I make sure like, you know, like there's potential about like helping them not make the mistakes that I made, or like getting better kind of efficiency of like getting on the ground and like getting moving. So like for me, like that was a big part about, you know, creating KAYPA, because I was thinking, you know, how do we create a space where, you know, like young Australians, like from one aspect, young Australians can come to Korea and meet like their counterparts who are Korean and like they're interested in like the Australia-Korea relationship. So they have like some kind of like shared goals or like shared values that they can meet and like interest to connect. But on like the flip side as well, it was interesting because in Australia, there's a community called KAYPA, which is like the sister organization. So that's like the Australia Korea Young Professionals Association. And they have like mostly, I guess, like Australians or Koreans who are based in Australia. So like when I was thinking about it, it was like the obvious like relationship and partnership. So, which is like why we ended up kind of in KAYPA, because it matches at KAYPA. And it's actually like in line with a lot of the Korea-Australia relationships, because like at like the business level, there's like the AKBC, which is like the Australia-Korea Business Council, and then there's the KABC, which is the Korea-Australia Business Council. So they have counterparts in both countries, and they always have that kind of like sister relationship.
Very cool.
So I remember when I went to Melbourne 2 months ago or a month ago. So I was in Australia for a conference, and I met up with the current like chair of like KAYPA, which is like the Australian version.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about, what kind of opportunities we can do, like how can we make it like complementary to each other? How can we send people vice versa to both countries, and really get the most out of that relationship? So that was a big part of like me thinking, what can I create in Korea to give that space? But very much an emphasis on helping Koreans as well, because I think a lot of younger Koreans, if they do, whether they do or do not speak English completely fluently, how do we create a space for them if they are interested in working overseas, or they are interested in a Korea-Australia relationship?
Well, look, I mean, in terms of the intent of these types of conversations, this is like a perfect example of a great one. I'm very excited for the future of the organization that you're building out and ways to collaborate. So thanks so much for joining the podcast.